Long before the final snow of Ragnarök touched the bones of gods, there was a war that never ended, the ancient, grinding hatred between the Aesir and the Jötnar. The gods of Asgard, golden and proud, stood eternal upon their high walls. The giants of Jotunheim, vast and elemental, seethed with cold rage in the shadow of Yggdrasil. Between them, no peace had ever held. But amid this storm of blood and fire, something strange, even dangerous, took root, a union that should never have been. Thor, the Thunderer, fiercest of the Aesir and son of Odin himself, was the bane of the giants. With Mjolnir in hand, he shattered their skulls and broke their fortresses. Yet there was one he could not shatter, Járnsaxa, a giantess of steel and storm. She was not made of brittle ice nor dim-witted stone. Her blood ran with the fire of the old earth, her strength rivaling the mountains, and her eyes burned with the light of lightning trapped in iron. Their first meeting was war, their second, fury. But by the third, amidst the broken trees and smoking skies of Jarnvedr, a new feeling bloomed, dangerous and undeniable. In secret they met, thunder and steel entwined, and from that forbidden joining, a child was conceived. A child of two worlds. The day of his birth was a day of omens. In the caves beneath the roots of Midgard's tallest peak, Járnsaxa labored, her cries echoing like drumbeats across the stone. Thunder raged without rain. Lightning split the skies though no storm was seen. The ground trembled beneath wolves' paws. Across the 9 realms, ravens flew without rest, and Odin, perched on Hlidskjalf, watched in silence. When the child was born, the rocks cracked beneath his body. He did not wail. He roared, a sound like the sky being torn in two. His fists clenched with unnatural strength, and in one hand, he held a shard of the mountain, crushed like bread in his palm. He was named Magni, which in the tongue of the gods means might. He suckled not for nourishment, but for comfort. His appetite was not for milk, but for challenge. At 3 days old, he stood and walked. By the 7th, he lifted boulders that whole war bands could not budge. At 10 nights, he laughed as thunder rolled, mimicking his father's fury. And so Thor, proud and defiant, brought him to Asgard. But the halls of the gods are not warm to children of two bloods. The Aesir gathered in their golden hall to behold the boy. Magni stood tall for his age, already near the height of a dwarfsmith, his eyes bright as lightning dancing in the sky. Yet no laughter welcomed him. Heimdall, ever watchful, narrowed his eyes. He bears the mark of Jotunheimer, he muttered. The strength of giants. Tyr, the one-handed god of justice, grunted. Strength without loyalty is peril. A wolf can wear a golden collar. Even Frigg, wise and motherly, hesitated. The weave of fate frays when bloodlines mix. What place has he in the prophecy of gods? But Thor, unbending, stood between them. Say what you will, he thundered. This is my son. He is of me, and stronger than any of yours. Still, the whispers never ceased. A child of Járnsaxa? A hybrid of storm and stone? Would he one day lift Mjolnir, or turn it against the gods? One day, their fears would be tested. Thor, as ever, ventured to battle. He faced the giant Hrungnir, whose skull was of stone and whose rage was like fire on the sea. They clashed with such fury that the mountains cracked. Thor struck the killing blow, but Hrungnir's immense body toppled onto him, pinning the god of thunder beneath stone. The Aesir rushed to help, but not one could move the giant's corpse. Even Odin strained and failed. Then, from the edge of the hill, came a child's voice. Is father playing at sleep? Magni, no more than 3 winters old, strode forth. With no fanfare and no spell, he placed his small hands beneath Hrungnir's stony neck and lifted. With a single breath, he tossed the carcass aside like a wet cloak. The gods were stunned. Silence ruled for a long moment, until Thor, rising to his feet, laughed with thunder and pride. None among you did this. Only my son, my Magni. He shall have Hrungnir's great horse, Gulfaxi, as a gift. But Odin's eye darkened. He is bold, the All-Father said, and loyal for now. But you give to him a gift of war, not wisdom. Be wary of what you nurture. Thor. The tree of mixed blood bears uncertain fruit. So Magni grew, watched by gods who feared him, loved by a father who trusted him, and stirred by a legacy that did not yet know its end. He was neither god nor giant. His fists were thunder, his laughter a rumble in the clouds. In him ran the strength of the earth's bones and the will of the skies above. His presence was a promise and a warning. One day, the sun would darken. The wolf would break its chain. The final war, Ragnarök, would come. And in the smoking ruins of Asgard, when Mjolnir lay broken and the old gods fallen, it was whispered that one would rise, Magni, son of thunder and steel, who would lift the hammer again. Whether he would rebuild the world or remake it in his own image, none could say. But all knew this. The might of Magni was only beginning. In the deep hollows beneath Midgard's mountains, amidst roars of thunder and groaning earth, the world bore witness to a miracle born of war and love. Magni, son of Thor, god of thunder, and Járnsaxa, the iron-blooded giantess of the storm. He came into the world not as other babes, but with a roar that echoed through the roots of Yggdrasil, shaking birds from their nests and wolves from their dens. From the start, he was unlike any child seen in the 9 realms. At 3 days old, he crushed stone in his palm. At 7, he walked unaided, laughing like rolling thunder. The animals of Midgard avoided his path, not from fear, but in reverence, sensing in him the power of gods and something more ancient still. But while Thor rejoiced in his son's strength, the gods of Asgard looked upon Magni with unease. "A son of Járnsaxa?" whispered the golden-haired Balder. "He is no full god," muttered Heimdall, guardian of the Bifrost. "He is strong," Odin admitted, "but strength without control burns worlds." Thor silenced them all. "Let the boy grow. Let fate test him, and we shall see if the blood of Thor runs truer than the blood of giants." And fate, ever listening, did not wait long. It came in the form of Hrungnir, a stone-hearted giant of Jotunheimr, whose skull was harder than granite and whose mouth never ceased boasting. He had once barged into Asgard drunk, challenging the Aesir to feats of strength and wit. But it was Thor who answered, and Thor who promised to crush Hrungnir like the boulder he resembled. They met on the great plain of Jotunheimr, where earth had never known peace. Thor, with Mjolnir in hand, came roaring across the field, his chariot pulled by the goats Hrungnir and Toothgrinder. Hrungnir stood ready, his massive body like a moving mountain, wielding a shield of stone and a whetstone blade larger than a ship's keel. Their clash was felt across the 9 realms. The sky turned black as thunderclouds churned, and lightning cracked the heavens. Hrungnir hurled his whetstone, and Thor cast Mjolnir in answer. The weapons collided midair with such force that shards of stone fell like rain. The whetstone broke apart, and a piece lodged in Thor's forehead, but Mjolnir struck true. Hrungnir's skull shattered, and the giant toppled, lifeless. But his death brought no victory. Hrungnir's enormous corpse fell directly onto Thor, pinning the god beneath the weight of stone flesh. Even Mjolnir, resting beside him, could not be lifted. The goats whinnied. The sky cleared. Yet the thunder did not rise. The gods came running. Odin, Tyr, Vidar, and Heimdall all pulled, strained, chanted, and sweated. But Hrungnir's body would not budge. Thor groaned beneath the weight, blood streaming from his brow. Am I to fall, not by blade or curse, but by the carcass of a drunk stone giant? Then, from the edge of the hill, a child's voice rang out. "Is father sleeping?" It was Magni, no older than 3 winters, his hair tousled by the wind, his bare feet dusty from the road. His eyes scanned the scene, not in panic, but in curiosity. Before the gods could stop him, the boy strode forward. He placed his small hands beneath Hrungnir's neck and shoulders. He braced his feet and tightened his jaw. And then, with a single grunt and a glimmer of effort, he lifted the body. Hrungnir's corpse rose like a curtain on a stage and crashed to the side. The gods stumbled back, stunned. Thor, battered but grinning, sat up and laughed. "None of you could move him," he said, pointing at the gods. "But my son, my Magni, freed me with ease." Pride beamed from Thor's face. He embraced the boy and declared, "For this, you shall have Gulfaxi, Hrungnir's golden-maned horse, as your reward." But not all were pleased. Odin's single eye glimmered with shadow. "You give a giant's steed to a child of giants? Even gifts sow seeds, Thor. Be careful which roots you nourish." Thor replied only with silence and a smile, his hand resting on his son's shoulder. From that day forward, none doubted Magni's strength, not even the gods. And though he was still a boy, the whispers of fate began to grow louder. That when the old gods fall, when Mjolnir lies broken and Asgard turns to ash, Magni would remain. That he would lift the hammer again. That the age of the old gods would end, and the age of might, his might, would begin. The sun hung high over Grjotunagard, casting jagged shadows across the rocky plain. Thunderclouds rumbled overhead as the two greatest forces of might in the 9 realms faced one another. Thor, the thunder god, hammer of the Aesir, and Hrungnir, the fiercest of the Jötnar, whose skull and heart were forged from stone itself. Hrungnir bellowed with laughter, his granite teeth grinding. "You ride in thunder, red-bearded god, but you will fall like rain before me." Thor stood atop his chariot, lightning coiled around Mjolnir in his hand. His eyes were stormlight. "You've insulted the gods. You've entered Asgard drunk and left it scorched. Now you pay." The ground split as Hrungnir charged, raising his whetstone blade. An immense slab sharpened on the bones of fallen beasts. Thor leapt from his chariot, a streak of lightning, and hurled Mjolnir midair. Hrungnir's whetstone spun like a wheel toward the god's head. The two weapons met with an ear-splitting crack. The whetstone shattered, shards of it raining down like knives. One jagged fragment pierced Thor's forehead, embedding itself deep. Blood streamed down the god's face, but he did not fall. Mjolnir flew true. With a sound like mountains breaking, it smashed into Hrungnir's stone skull. The giant's mocking laugh turned into a choking gasp as he stumbled backward, then forward, then crashed to the earth like a crumbling tower. But fate played cruel tricks. Hrungnir's massive, lifeless body landed directly atop Thor, pinning the Thunderer beneath an avalanche of stone and bone. The plain went silent except for the groaning of the earth beneath the weight of the fallen. Thor struggled. His breath grew short. Though Mjolnir had avenged the gods, it now lay just out of reach. The gods came swiftly. Odin, his one eye grim. Tyr, stalwart and grimacing. Heimdall, fair but anxious. Even Baldur, gentle as spring rain, lent his strength. Together, the Aesir surrounded their fallen brother. They pulled at Hrungnir's corpse, pushed at his limbs, braced their feet and summoned runes of lifting, but the stone giant would not budge. Thor, wounded and furious beneath the weight, cursed the stubborn corpse. "Is this to be my end? Slain not by blade nor poison, but crushed under the rotund fool I vanquished." Odin said nothing. He only watched with a furrowed brow and a twitch of unease in his beard. "He is too heavy," muttered Heimdall, sweat on his brow. "The strength of many gods does not equal the fall of one giant." Tension rose among them. The air grew still. And then, a voice rang across the plain. "Is father hurt?" The gods turned. There, barefoot on the cracked stone, stood a child no taller than Thor's knee, Magni, the son of Thor and the storm giantess Járnsaxa. His hair was wild like flame, his eyes bright like blue steel. Though no older than 3 winters, his presence carried the weight of older things. He walked calmly past the startled gods, stepping lightly between cracks in the earth. "I'll help him," Magni said simply. Baldur placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Magni, no. This is no place for her." But the child had already stepped forward. He looked upon Hrungnir's vast corpse. One arm like a tree trunk, a torso like a stone hall, bones thick with ancient power. The gods had failed to move it even together. Magni placed his small hands beneath Hrungnir's shoulder. He exhaled. Then, like pulling weeds from frost-hardened soil, he lifted. Muscles swelled. The ground shuddered. Hrungnir's heavy corpse, unmovable even by Odin's will, rose from Thor's chest and crashed to the side like discarded rubble. Gasps echoed across the field. Thor coughed, free at last, and looked up in disbelief. Blood still traced his face, but his expression turned from pain to pride. "By the roots of Yggdrasil," he muttered. The boy moved him. The gods stood in stunned silence. Magni, chest heaving, simply smiled at his father and said, "You dropped your hammer." Thor burst into laughter. He pulled the boy into a bear-like embrace and cried, "For this deed, I give you Gulfaxi, the golden-maned horse of Hrungnir. May he carry you into glory." But Odin's face darkened. "You reward a child of Jotun blood," he growled. "You place a giant steed in the hands of a son not fully of Asgard?" Thor's smile did not waver. "He is my son. That is enough." From that day on, the gods watched Magni not with pity or suspicion, but with a silent awe that bordered on fear. Whispers stirred that if a child could lift the dead weight of a stone giant, what might he do as a warrior grown? They wondered if Magni's future would be forged with the Aesir or against them. But Thor had no doubts. He looked at his son, already stronger than many gods, and whispered, "You are the strength that will remain when even we are dust. When Ragnarök comes and the old world burns, you will carry the hammer, and the storm shall never die." The sky above Grjotunagard still hung heavy with thunderclouds, though the battle was over and the cries of war had faded into uneasy silence. Hrungnir, the stone-skinned terror of the Jötnar, lay broken, his body cast aside like rubble. And there, on the shattered plain, young Magni, the child born of Thor and the giantess Járnsaxa, stood beside his father, breath shallow but eyes ablaze. He had done what none of the gods could. He had lifted a fallen giant. Thor, bloodied and breathless beneath his red beard, knelt and embraced the boy. He laughed with the deep, booming joy that could shake mountains. "For this strength, little one, for this courage, I name you heir to Gulfaxi, the golden-maned steed of Hrungnir. May it carry you swift as storm winds across the realms." The pronouncement echoed through the plain like a crack of thunder, and though the sky did not break, a quiet tension did. Gulfaxi was no mere warhorse. Bred in the dark forges of Jotunheim and fed on mountain mist, its hooves could outrun the wind. Its mane shimmered with daylight even under moonless skies. A prize of battle, yes, but also a symbol of power. It was expected that spoils of such a foe would be divided among the Aesir, or claimed by the All-Father himself. Instead, Thor had placed it in the hands of a boy, and a boy of mixed blood at that. The gods gathered, most silent. But not Odin. His single eye narrowed as he stepped forward, his ravens shifting on his shoulders. "You give the horse to him?" His voice was low, but carried sharp as a spear. A gift not to the hall of the Aesir, but to a child who still suckles wisdom from both breast and stone? Thor rose slowly, his hammer resting at his side. He earned it. None of us could lift that corpse, not even you. But the boy did, with no spell, no rune, only the strength the blood of gods and giants gave him. "He is my son." Odin's beard twitched, and the wind around him whispered, as if his thoughts summoned voices from beyond. "He is also the son of Járnsaxa, a Jotun, a mother of iron bones and stormfire. You claim him fully Aesir, but that is not the whole of him." Frigga watched from the edge, lips pursed. Tyr stood with his hand upon his sword hilt. Even gentle Balder could not mask the unease coiling through the air. It was not merely about a horse. It was about what Magni represented, a bridge between Asgard and Jotunheim, strength not born purely of Aesir blood, but of mingled legacy. In Magni's small form they saw the crumbling of the ancient walls between god and giant, the thinning of the line that had for so long kept chaos and order separate. Odin's voice dropped further, dark and prophetic. "You would raise him on a steed born of enemy blood. Would you have him ride into Asgard's future, or ride over it? Thor met his father's eye without flinching. When the fire comes and Fenrir howls, it will not be old blood or pure blood that saves us. It will be strong blood. And this boy's strength may yet outlast all of ours. The other gods murmured, but held their tongues. Some nodded slowly. Others looked away. Politics, ancient and bitter, churned beneath their feet like underground rivers. Magni, unaware of the full weight of their gazes, patted Gulfaxi's neck. The golden mane shimmered against the gray stone of the battlefield. The horse snorted, then bowed its head low to the boy, as if recognizing not a child, but a rider destined to bear burdens the world had yet to offer. As they left the battlefield, Magni astride the golden steed and Thor walking beside him, storm clouds rolled farther into the distance, but not away. For though Hrungnir was dead and the battle won, the realm of gods had changed. And deep in Odin's thoughts, beneath his ancient wisdom and long-fused wars, a new question stirred. What happens when a god of tomorrow rises from the union they've always feared? He did not yet know the answer, but he would be watching. Always. After the battle with Hrungnir, the fields of Grjotunagard lay cracked and scarred, the earth splintered by divine fury and giant malice. Thor stood victorious, his hammer Mjolnir still humming faintly with the storm's residue. The stone-hearted Hrungnir, the most formidable of the Jötnar, lay shattered and lifeless, his great bulk sprawled across the broken land like a felled mountain. Yet victory had come at a cost. Thor had been pinned beneath the weight of Hrungnir's corpse, and none among the gods could free him. It was then that young Magni, only 3 nights old, arrived on unsteady legs, his golden hair wild like his father's, but his eyes storm-colored like the blood of Járnsaxa that ran through him. With no hesitation, no word, and no struggle, Magni gripped the fallen giant's body and lifted it, a feat beyond even the mightiest of the Aesir. In that moment, the heavens themselves seemed to pause, watching this child of thunder and frost do what the gods could not. In the quiet that followed, Thor looked upon his son not just with pride, but with a sense of recognition. This was more than bloodline. This was legacy. And so, with no hesitation, he gifted Gulfaxi, Hrungnir's magnificent golden-maned horse, to Magni. The steed had belonged to a giant, now slain, its strength and speed unmatched by any horse in the 9 realms. It was a fitting reward, Thor thought, for a child who had already proven himself stronger than gods. But not all saw it so. High in Asgard, the skies grew darker than before. Odin, all-seeing and deeply bound to the web of fate, watched the events unfold from Hlidskjalf, his throne above the world. To him, this was no innocent gift. To give the spoils of a fallen enemy, not to the Aesir as was tradition, but to a child of mixed divine and Jötnar blood, was a dangerous signal. It was more than sentiment. It was a crack in the ancient order. Gulfaxi was a prize, yes, but it was also a symbol. To Odin, Thor's act was not generosity, it was recklessness. No council was held. No words were spoken openly. But the tension spread like frost across a still lake. The Aesir began to whisper in the halls of Valisjaf. Frigga kept her counsel, but watched with quiet worry. Tyr, ever torn between honor and law, remained silent, but wary. Heimdall narrowed his eyes when the boy passed. Even Baldur, bright and kind, did not smile as before. The gods, despite all their wisdom, were not immune to fear, and Magni, for all his youth, had become a reminder of what they feared most: change. Odin did not confront Thor. He did not need to. His silence, cold and deliberate, was punishment enough. The All-Father knew the prophecy of Ragnarök as well as he knew the lines on his weathered palm. He had spent countless ages weaving plans, securing alliances, and sacrificing much to postpone the end. Yet now, his own son had planted a seed of uncertainty in the heart of Asgard. Magni was strong, too strong. And he bore the blood of Járnsaxa, the Iron Giantess, a lineage Odin could never trust. Magni, still a child in years but not in strength, began to feel it. The sideways glances, the stilled conversations when he entered a hall, the subtle distance that grew between him and the golden halls he was meant to call home. He played alone. He trained without companions. The horse gifted to him carried him across the clouds, but no one cheered as he passed. Though his father's love was unwavering, even Thor could not shield him from the quiet unease that settled over the realm. He began to look north more often, toward the shadowed mountains of Jotunheim, wondering if perhaps he would be more welcome among the people of his mother. But even that path was shrouded in uncertainty, for though he bore giant blood, he was no Jotun. His destiny was not shaped by stone and chaos, but by something stranger, something in between. Neither fully god nor fully giant, Magni had no true place. He was a bridge unwanted by both shores. Still he rode. Across the Bifrost, through the mists, along the windswept crags of Midgard and beyond. With Gulfaxi beneath him, he carved a path into legend, even as he remained a stranger in his own hall. The gods watched him grow, watched his strength deepen, and his silence harden. They wondered what his future would bring. And deep within himself, Magni began to wonder too, not just what he would become, but what role the gods had already written for him. For in Asgard, nothing is forgotten, and nothing given without cost. In the years that followed Gulfaxi's gifting and the silent storm it stirred, the golden halls of Asgard resumed their splendor, but an undercurrent of caution lingered. Magni, once the miracle child whose strength had astounded even the gods, began to fade from their celebrations. He was not banished, nor scorned in word, but slowly and deliberately he was edged from the center of Asgard's luminous heart. Invitations to councils grew fewer. Feasts passed without his name spoken. Honors were granted to others, while he watched from a distance. Thor, burdened by his own loyalties, to fatherhood, to Asgard, and to the wisdom he had never claimed, remained close when he could. But the thunder god's duties were endless, and even he could not erase what had been done. Odin's silence lingered like a shadow at high noon, never blocking the sun but dulling its warmth. As the seasons passed, and the days bled into one another like the slow churn of time itself, Magni remained hidden in the corners of the 9 realms. While the gods basked in their eternal glory, basking in feasts and revelry, Magni carved his own path, one that wound quietly through forgotten realms and ancient places where even the gods rarely tread. He had grown, not just in stature but in presence. His frame had thickened, his muscles honed by years of solitude and silence. No longer was he the child who had lifted the corpse of Hrungnir. Now, he was a silent force, waiting to be unleashed. He had mastered the art of restraint, the kind of restraint that only the truly powerful understood. He wielded his strength not for show, not for praise, but for something deeper, something primal. In those early years, Thor had sought him out, the only god who still saw Magni for what he could become. It was Thor who, despite the cold distance the gods had put between father and son, came to him with the mighty hammer Mjolnir, not as a gift, but as a challenge. "Learn, Magni," Thor had said. "The hammer is not just strength. It is power that must be controlled, a storm that must be steered. It has guided me through the battles of gods and giants, but it must also teach you humility. Understand its weight, its fury, and its purpose. Let it be the storm that shapes you, not the other way around." Under his father's reluctant guidance, Magni spent years learning to wield Mjolnir. At first, it was a struggle. The hammer, heavy and forged in the heart of a dying star, was not meant for the untrained hand of a child, no matter how mighty his blood. But Magni was no ordinary child. With each swing, each test, he grew in his understanding of the weapon and the power that lay dormant within him. He practiced alone, away from the eyes of the gods. In the hills of Jotunheim, beneath the frozen peaks of Niflheim, in the dark forests of Svartalfheim, he wielded Mjolnir in silence, testing the limits of his strength. The hammer's thunderous strikes shattered mountains and split the skies, but Magni's control over the weapon was what set him apart. He did not fight with rage or ego. He fought with the quiet certainty of one who knew the storm was only as powerful as the hand that guided it. In his solitude, Magni began to understand his place. The gods may have dismissed him, cast him aside as the child of Thor and a Jotun, but they did not know what he had become. His strength was unmatched, not because of his lineage, but because of the years of training, reflection, and self-discipline. He had learned the true meaning of power. It was not in dominance, but in knowing when to strike, when to hold back, and when to wait. He did not seek fame, nor did he crave the approval of his divine kin. Instead, he found solace in the quiet corners of the world, where his presence was as much a whisper as it was a roar. The horse Gullfaxi, once his gift from his father, now galloped with him across the 9 realms. It was a silent partnership, born not of showmanship, but of understanding. Magni had no need for the crowds that Thor so often attracted. His power was not for display. It was for the inevitable moment when it would be needed most. And the day would come when it would be needed. Far above, in the halls of Asgard, the gods continued to sit at their tables, oblivious to the shift in the winds of fate. Odin, with his one eye fixed on the tapestry of destiny, saw the signs of Ragnarök creeping closer, distant tremors, the howling of wolves, the approach of the serpent Jormungandr. He saw the signs, yes, but he did not see Magni. The boy who had once been the heir to Thor's power had faded into myth, into legend. But Odin was blind to that which he did not wish to see. He believed in the old ways, the bloodlines, the alliances, the politics of gods. But the moment of reckoning would not be determined by politics. Magni knew it, even in his silence. He could feel the slow pull of destiny, a force that tugged at his very soul. The hammer, still strapped to his side, was no longer just a weapon, it was a symbol, a promise. When the time came, he would wield it not as a son, nor as a giant, but as something new, a force that transcended the boundaries set by gods and Jötnar alike. In the deepening shadows of the 9 realms, Magni stood on the edge of the world, watching the sky darken, the storm clouds gather. His time was coming. He could feel it. When the final battle was fought, when the gods would rise against their enemies and the earth would tremble with the clash of giants and immortals, Magni would stand. His strength, honed in silence, would echo through the halls of Asgard. And the gods, who had once cast him aside, would know that he was no longer the boy who had lifted the corpse of Hrungnir. He was the storm that would come for them all. As the twilight of the gods descended, the 9 realms trembled beneath the weight of inevitable destruction. The silence that had once defined Magni's existence was shattered by the roar of Ragnarök, the final battle between the Aesir, the Jötnar, and the forces of chaos. The prophecies that had long whispered through the winds of time now rang out with unrelenting clarity. The great serpent Jormungandr rose from the depths, the wolf Fenrir howled, and the sky burned with the fires of Muspelheim as Surtur's legions poured forth, set on bringing about the end of everything. The stars themselves seemed to shudder in the face of such primordial power. The gods, despite their strength and wisdom, were not prepared for the sheer magnitude of the storm that now swept across Asgard. Odin, his eye fixed upon the battlefield, saw the dark tide rise and knew that there was no turning back. The walls of Asgard, once impregnable, began to crack as the armies of the giants and the forces of chaos descended upon the gods. Thor, mighty and resolute, stood at the head of his warriors, Mjolnir crackling with the energy of storms, but even the thunder god could not halt the oncoming tide. Loki, with his own agenda, fought alongside his monstrous offspring, bringing havoc in his wake. The very fabric of the realms seemed to tear asunder. In the heart of the storm, where gods and giants clashed, Magni emerged, not as the boy who had once been sidelined, but as a force in his own right. The silence that had once enveloped him was now replaced by the resounding roar of his presence. He stood tall, a figure of unmatched strength, his grip tightening around Mjolnir, the hammer that had long been his heritage. It was no longer a weapon of mere thunder and lightning. Now, in his hands, it was the symbol of a new beginning, a weapon forged not just by the gods, but by the fires of fate itself. Beside him stood his brother, me. The son of Thor who had never known the same quiet solitude as Magni, but had been shaped by the same storm. Together, they moved like a storm themselves, striking down foes with the fury of the gods and the relentless power of giants. Their bond, tempered in the fires of battle, was unspoken but understood. They were the last heirs to the old blood, the last remnants of the divine line that had once ruled the realms. The battle raged on. Thor, in a final act of defiance, faced off against Jormungandr, his hammer crackling as he struck the great serpent down. But the victory was fleeting. As the serpent's lifeless body coiled around him, Thor was struck by its venomous tail, his body slowly succumbing to the poison as the ground beneath him shook. His death marked the fall of an era, the end of the god's reign. Odin, too, met his fate. His spear, Hrungnir, shattered in the jaws of Fenrir, the wolf that had been his nemesis for so long. The All-Father, the one who had seen all, could not escape the destiny that had been foretold. With their deaths, the gods fell into disarray. The once mighty halls of Asgard were reduced to rubble, the golden city a burning ruin. The sky itself seemed to tear open as Surtur's sword, forged from the heart of fire, descended to consume all. The realms shook with the force of the final judgment, and the forces of chaos surged forward, claiming their victory. Yet, amidst the destruction and the chaos, Magni and me endured. Where others had fallen, they stood firm, their strength unparalleled. Magni, with the power of Mjolnir coursing through him, held his ground against the onslaught. His hammer cleaved through the enemy with the force of a storm, but it was not just physical strength that kept him standing. It was the quiet understanding that he had learned in his years of solitude, that even in the face of certain doom, there was something unyielding within him, something that would not be swayed by the chaos of the world. And me, with his own rage tempered by years of battle, stood by his brother. Together, they fought against the forces that sought to tear the world apart. But they were not immune to the devastation that swept across them. As the battle reached its peak, the brothers found themselves surrounded by the ruins of their father's legacy, the world crumbling beneath them. The final blow came as the great fires of Surtur consumed the last remnants of the world. The heat was unbearable, and the ground beneath their feet began to break apart. Magni, with Mjolnir in hand, struck one final blow against the forces of chaos, but the flames of Surtur's wrath were too much. He and me, the last of the Aesir, were thrown into the chasm of destruction, their bodies battered, but their spirits unbroken. As the ashes of the old world settled, and the silence of Ragnarök enveloped the 9 realms, Magni and me remained. They were not the last gods, for the world would be reborn. But they were the last of the old order, the last remnants of the divine lineage that had once shaped the cosmos. The world had been broken, but in its place, a new one would rise. And in the ashes, Magni and me would rise too, not as the sons of gods, nor as the sons of giants, but as the survivors of a world reborn. The storm had passed, and they would be the ones to carry its memory into the future. The world lay still, fractured, and empty, the echoes of Ragnarök fading into the ashen winds. The mighty halls of Asgard were no more, reduced to ruins where the gods had once feasted and ruled. The 9 realms, once vibrant and full of life, now stood silent under a sky that had been torn asunder. The earth had cracked, mountains had fallen, and oceans had boiled with fire. The very fabric of existence seemed to have been unraveled by the great battle, and yet, amidst the wreckage, 2 figures remained. Magni and me stood at the edge of the ruins, their bodies scarred but unbroken. The weight of their father's hammer, Mjolnir, now lay heavy in Magni's hand, its power crackling with a quiet fury, waiting to be reborn. The storms of old had ceased, but the legacy of those who had wielded them was far from over. Magni felt the weight of his father's hammer, not just as a weapon, but as a mantle. The world was broken, but not beyond repair. As the dust of Ragnarök settled, Magni realized the true scope of his inheritance. Mjolnir had not only belonged to Thor, but to the legacy of the gods, to the essence of all that was once strong and noble in the old world. It was a symbol of destruction, yes, but also of creation, of renewal. As the last of the Aesir's bloodline, Magni knew that it was his duty to carry the hammer forward, not as a relic of the past, but as a beacon for the future. Beside him, Mie stood silent, his own heart heavy with the loss of their kin, their gods, and their home. The brothers, both sons of the storm, now stood alone, but they did not despair. Magni looked at Mie and saw not just his brother, but the continuation of the strength that had once been their father's, that had once coursed through the veins of the gods. They had survived Ragnarök, but their survival was not simply about outlasting the destruction. It was about what they would do with what remained. The old world had ended, but the new one was yet to be born. In that moment, Magni understood his role in the rebuilding of the world. He was no longer the child of Thor and the Jötnar, no longer bound by the expectations of either the gods or the giants. He was the son of the storm, but also the heir to a legacy of strength, of power tempered by wisdom and restraint. He had inherited Mjolnir, not as a weapon of vengeance, but as a tool of renewal. The hammer that had once struck down foes, that had brought thunder and lightning to the world, now had a new purpose. It would not destroy the old world, it would forge the new one. Magni raised Mjolnir high, the hammer crackling with energy. The world around him trembled as the storm that had been his legacy stirred once more, but this time it was not a storm of wrath, it was a storm of rebirth. The winds of the old world had scattered, but now they began to converge again, swirling into new life, new beginnings. The first seeds of renewal began to take root in the soil of a broken world, and Magni felt that power surge through him. He was not just the last of the gods, nor the last of the giants. He was something new, a force that carried both the weight of the past and the hope of the future. Beside him, Mie too raised his hand, the silent force of his brother's power complementing the hammer's storm. Together, they were the last remnants of a world that had been destroyed and the first echoes of the world that would rise from the ashes. The sky began to change. The cracks in the heavens that had once heralded destruction began to heal, the first light of a new dawn breaking through the storm clouds. Magni and Mie had witnessed the fall of the old gods, the end of their world. But they would not stand idle in the face of the future. Their strength, their legacy, would be the foundation upon which the new world was built. Magni stood tall, his grip firm on Mjolnir, as the thunder began to rumble once more, not in fury, but in promise. The thunder that had once heralded war and destruction now heralded a new age. A new world was being born, one forged in the strength of the past, but tempered with the wisdom of survival. Magni knew that his role was not to be a king, not to rule over the gods, but to guide them, to protect the fragile rebirth of a world torn asunder. He looked out across the horizon, feeling the weight of the hammer in his hand. In that moment, he understood that the future was not written in the stars, nor in the bloodlines of the gods. It was forged in the heart of those who survived, in the strength of those who would rebuild, and in the hope that would rise from the ashes of destruction. And so, Magni and Mie, the last sons of Thor, stood at the threshold of a new world, one built on the foundation of strength, legacy, and the quiet, unstoppable power that had endured through the storms of Ragnarök. The hammer that had once been a symbol of the gods' power was now a symbol of the future, a reminder that even in the face of complete destruction, there was always hope for rebirth. The world had ended, but the storm had only just begun.